Archaeodeath Field Report with Professor Howard Williams.
Morning everybody, and welcome to another Archaeodeath video from the landscape. This is a bit of a field report and it's a bit of a book review, because what I've done is I've used my sanctioned by the government morning exercise to come out to the beautiful churchyard of Hope in Flintshire. This was a cycle from my home, and you can see behind me I've angled the camera, positioned on a Victorian tomb, so that you can see the south wall of the medieval church and the church tower. I haven't checked my notes, but I think it dates back to the 15th century at least. Now, the building behind you is therefore a late medieval construction, but this church site is far, far older. It's a circular churchyard, and that is often seen as a sign of a pre-Norman foundation, that there was a church here before the mid-11th century. And indeed, we are right by the line of the late 8th, early 9th century linear earthwork built by the Mercians called Wat's Dyke. Yes, you've heard about that one before. And that runs just to the east of the church here at Hope. Now, the churchyard is inhabited. There are sheep, and they're watching me. There's a little flock of 5, I think, very woolly sheep that are keeping an eye on me. They're wondering what this suspicious man is doing lurking around the churchyard. But the reason I'm here this morning, particularly to share a video with you, is because Hope has 3 pieces of early medieval stone sculpture that have survived in the walls and inside the church. Now, I've done an Archaeodeath blog post about these, so I will put a link in the description below so that you can read up further about these 3 fragments. And they're a rare survival from this area of early medieval stone sculpture, and that in itself is an indication of an early ecclesiastical centre here. Now, one of them is a ring-headed Latin cross that was found a decade or so ago inside the church during construction work, and they put it on display inside the church. 2 pieces of early medieval stone sculpture are visible in the outside external fabric of the church. Now, as I've been talking to you, one of them has been lurking in the corner of the image, and if you are just to this side of me, just above the buttress in the south wall, is a broken up, recut fragment of a ring-headed Latin cross. Now, that monument is one of 2 in the external area, visible externally in the church, and it obviously not in its original position. It's a much older piece of stonework that was banging around the churchyard and was reused, and perhaps deliberately reused, so that it could be seen as a Christian motif, augmenting and symbolically enhancing the structure that was being built. Now, its original function we don't know. Professor Nancy Edwards of Bangor University, who produced the corpus of early medieval inscribed and sculpted stones for North Wales, just puts a broad date range of this ring-headed ring cross as 9th to 11th centuries AD, and she says the same for the other 2 monuments. And so here at Hope Church, much later fabric, an association with the late 8th, early 9th century linear monument of Wat's Dyke, but 3 tantalising fragments of early medieval stone sculpture visible in and around the churchyard. And you can, as well as some beautiful Victorian graves, there's blossom on the trees, a view of Hope Mountain, and a big flag saying thank you to the NHS. There's a lovely churchyard, and in addition to all that, you've got these hints of an early ecclesiastical centre here at Hope in what is now the Welsh borders, but once would, I think, have been a major artery of communication north-south along the edge of the Welsh uplands beside Hope Mountain, and perhaps also on an intersecting route linking, or not far from a route, linking following the Roman road from Chester into Wales. I'm always timing these videos with church bells. It's obviously a technique I've acquired. Now, my first part of my video is, this is another example for you of coming out to a churchyard, somewhere I can just about get to with the lockdown, and show you the few things I can get access to of early medieval date. But there's another reason why this is particularly apposite. Because I have with me, did you see me duck out of camera there? I was just picking something up. I have with me a book that I produced, co-edited 5 years ago, called Early Medieval Stone Monuments. And it's edited by myself, Joanne Curtin, who now is an employee of the CBA, Council for British Archaeology, but at the time was a postgraduate researcher at the University of Chester, our first postgraduate research student, and Professor Megan Gondek, who is a specialist in early medieval carved stone monuments. And together we put together this this edited book, which is available, published by Boydell and Brewer Press, or Boydell Press, in their Boydell Studies in Medieval Art and Architecture series. And we called it Early Medieval Stone Monuments because it encapsulates a series of studies that explore different dimensions of how we approach carved and sculpted stone monuments from the 5th to the 11th centuries AD, and then something of their reception, how those monuments endure and explored, have biographies right the way through the centuries up to the present day, including examples like this, where they're reused and redisplayed within later architecture. So the book has in it a series of chapters. There were 9 in all in this book by Early Medieval Stone Monuments. There's an introduction called Stones in Substance, Space and Time, and that was by me, Joanne and Megan. And in that introduction we survey different approaches to early medieval stone monuments, which are often out of their original location. We often lack an archaeological context for them, and yet we do show that by looking at their materiality, their biographies and their landscape context, we can often tell exciting and interesting stories from the material remains. And we use the Flintshire monument of probably late 10th, early 11th century of Minor Quiven as a case study, but we also explore Heavenfield and a textual exploration of the cross there, and we look at memory work and how the materials that, of the stone, the material qualities of stone, the biographies of monuments and their landscape context allow us to take perspectives on stone monuments that move beyond simply decoding the meanings of their texts and their ornaments. And those are important too, or we can say new things. And we also talk about Nancy and my collaborative work, Nancy Edwards and my collaborative work with Gary Robinson at the Pillar of Elizeg, as another case study of how we can look at texts in context, a context of space and context of time, and how they change and shift through time. So that's the introduction to the book. Then there is a case study by Joanne Curtin from her doctoral research on the Clulo cross. Ing-Marie Bak-Danielsen has a chapter looking at rune stones in the late Viking Age Scandinavian landscape and memory as how they work mnemonically within the landscape. Megan Gondek looks at structural context and carved stone monuments from early medieval northern Britain. Clona O'Leary looks at Iniscealtra in County Clare as a case study for memory, belief and identity and the accrual of monuments in a particular ecclesiastical context. Iris Crowers, whose doctoral thesis I recently was the opponent for, her study was looking at biographies and audiences of late Viking Age and medieval stone crosses and cross-decorated stones in western Norway. So she takes a biographical and landscape approach to these later medieval crosses, late Viking Age and later. Mark Hall looks at lifeways in stone and in an early medieval Scottish sculpture. And Jennifer Nagaudry looks at Irish stone monuments, looking at Clong MacNoise in particular, but other sites, and looking at how those often 10th century monuments are received and perceived in later contexts. Now my final chapter in the book, my chapter in the book and the final chapter in the book is about hogback stones, and I shall come back and discuss hogbacks at another moment in another video. But for now, I gift to you Hope Church and its wonderful surviving fragments, and a book which Boydell Press produced in 2015, and you can purchase and you can order for your library. And I'm obliged to add that I believe during the lockdown Boydell are cutting the price of this book quite significantly, and I'll put a link in the descriptor below where you can buy it at a really a steal price for this volume. Not that I'm getting a commission on this, but I think it's an important time to get hold of some of these books that have been coming out. Shameful plugging, I know, but why not? Anyway, so that's my sum up of my my talk from Hope Church, where I hope you appreciate this a beautiful churchyard, some amazing surviving stone sculpture that you can access in perhaps more less restricted times, and also introducing you to a book that's still fresh and has new perspectives to offer on how we approach early medieval stone monuments.
If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing to Howard Williams on YouTube. In addition, consider following the ArchaeoDeath WordPress blog at howardwilliamsblog.wordpress.com.